Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. It is shaping up to be a long night for election officials in Georgia. Here is a live look at ballots being counted in Fulton County, which includes Atlanta. Things are tight, with less than a percentage point separating the candidates in the two races, which carries some pretty big implications not only for Georgia, but for President-elect Joe Biden. For more, I'm joined by CBSN's political reporter, Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin, we will not have official results tonight. You've told us that. But how are the counts going so far? Have you heard of any issues or anything that might cause a delay?
Well, election officials say that things are going pretty smoothly here. Remember, we've been watching to see these ballots being processed behind me. These are absentee ballots that they couldn't start tabulating until polls closed. But they can start processing ballots here in Georgia at least a week before Election Day. So they seem to have been able to get a head start. But election officials have been saying that, look, just because we don't know the results tonight, that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. It's just going to take a while to process some of these ballots. But we're watching here in Fulton County. This is the Atlanta area. This is a key area, of course, and this is an area that Democrats especially have been hoping to drive out turnout, especially among black voters here. And according to early exit polls and data that we've seen, it seems to suggest that the turnout among black voters has been similar to what we saw in November, which could be a good sign for Democrats.
Well, have you received any kind of indication, Caitlin, from elections officials of when they might be able to call these races?
Well, the Secretary of State said that maybe tomorrow, and they've been just cautioning people that we may not know the results tonight, but it depends on how they are able to process these ballots. Just to give you a sense of the number of voters that we're expecting here to have participated in the runoff, nearly an estimated about 4 million. 3 million voters voted early, 2 million in person and 1 million by mail. You could still drop off your absentee ballot in person today by 7 p.m. We visited a couple of polling locations earlier, and there weren't really long lines of people. Part of that is that they think a lot of people just voted early. There were 3 weeks of early voting here in Georgia. Another part is that this is a state that is used to conducting elections and being under the microscope, and so they've streamlined some of these processes. But what Republicans were hoping for was high turnout, especially in the northern parts of the state and conservative parts of the state. They were really aiming to drive up turnout among Trump's own supporters, and that's why they had the president come here last night to campaign. Democrats, meanwhile, had been focused on recreating the turnout that they saw in November, and they wanted to make sure that the Democratic candidates could catch up to Biden. Because remember, in November, the Democratic candidates got fewer votes than Joe Biden did. So they had been really aiming to turn out people who may not have voted down ballot, but voted in the presidential race, and also to turn out new voters. Another really interesting stat here is that over 100,000 people voted in these runoffs who didn't vote in November, which is pretty extraordinary considering that this is a runoff. It's happening in January. These elections don't have the kind of a big pull of presidential races, but on the ground here, it really has felt like a presidential race with about $500 million spent.
Yeah, I mean, it really is extraordinary when you think about that turnout. We're just coming off the holidays, and for all those reasons that you just mentioned, to have that many people coming out is really quite remarkable. Well, you have been on the ground there in Georgia talking with voters. Caitlin, did you get the sense that this race would turn out to be as tight as we are seeing it now?
They were expecting a really tight race, and no campaign was relying on polling because it's really difficult to tell who's actually going to show up in a runoff election. So it's difficult to get a real sense of things. So everyone that we spoke to, voters and campaigns and candidates alike, were saying that they believe this race could be anybody's guess. And what was really interesting, Elaine, earlier this afternoon, we got a statement from Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, the Republican incumbents here, saying that while they were encouraged by some of the turnout in some of the Republican areas, they were still urging people to turn out and vote. That was a statement sent out in the afternoon. So that suggests that they, may have been worried that not enough Republican voters, especially Trump Republican voters, were turning out. So that was kind of a last-minute push. And in that statement, they said that, look, this could come out down to every last vote in just a couple of precincts.
Well, these elections went to a runoff because none of the candidates were able to secure at least 50% of the vote back in November. What were their strategies, Caitlin, to not only keep the voters they had back then, but gain new voters to put them over that 50% threshold?
Well, one thing was trying to target voters who either didn't show up in the presidential or new voters entirely, especially younger voters, voters who may have turned voting age after the November election. That was certainly a target for Democrats. So what Republicans were trying to do was two things. First, target those Trump voters. Make sure that people who turn out in a presidential race for the president, the top of the ticket, and especially Trump's base, which is really, reliable to him, make sure that could transfer down ballot. And so that's why you saw the Republican candidates really align themselves with the president and try to make sure his voters turned out. But they also wanted to speak to more independent-minded voters, those voters who may have voted for Joe Biden because they didn't like the president, but who may have been inclined to vote for Republicans to show a balance of a check on power. And a few Republican voters that we talked to today said that they were voting because of that, voting for the Republicans to be a check on Biden. Democrats were hoping to not only activate new voters, but make sure that the voters that turned out for Biden also showed up in this race. And Democratic voters that we spoke to said that the victory that Biden got, becoming the first Democrat in nearly 30 years to win this state, this traditionally red state, really gave them the energy to kind of keep going and keep participating and get every last vote out.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns for us. Caitlin, thank you very much.
Thank you.